So hi everybody, we just looked at how to do all the shader setup and calibration for the color chart. Now I'm just gonna do pretty much the same stuff, maybe a bit quicker with just another prop that's not a color chart but has more natural surfaces, and it's a bit probably easier to set up, but it's basically is a sort of this type of scan of a salami slice, and I already have everything built for this prop. We have the full scene and everything. As for the chart, we would only focus on the front and the back part of it. So for that we can just find what cameras are that are associated with that. So we'll take O3, and the next one on the other side would be camera O8. So we disable everything, enable O3 and O8. So those are just two cameras that are enabled. On the opposite sides, let's export these cameras, call it cameras O1, just one, done. And I already have all the geometries and everything built for it, so we'll just reuse that. And for first we start with creating some, let's say for the frontal camera, zoom back, let's use this last light source. That's light number 12. That's pretty close to the camera, so let's generate those reference images that we did before for the color chart. Let's put it all back together, do 16-bit, do our curves on both of them, this one and that one, make it a layer, convert it to custom RGB linear space, done. So let's double that, and nope, that's our diffuse, go with diffuse. Now let's do the difference, and that's our specular. Now let's add them together, and that's our composite image. Delete all that. Do that again. Exposure, whatever that exposure is, we don't care in this image at the moment. So these are our images. Convert back to work in sRGB space. Disable the go back to 8-bit. That's it. And now let's save the whole thing under create a ref folder, call it Salami ref, and export all these images. So that's diffuse, that's specular, that's comp, again, we can do some exposure correction based on these markers here, but we'll just leave it like that and play with light intensity instead. So that's done. Now I know that at 100% it would be really zoomed in there, so let's see what that would look better on screen probably 25% for overall intensity, or 50%. I don't know, that should be fine. Let's go with 50%. So we just go and downsample 50% bilinear and do the same stuff, but call it diff small. Same with specular, and same with comp. S. And if we need smaller ones, we can do that later. So for now, we're good. We can close all that. So now we got on the ref folder our versions, full-sized and downsampled ones, so the ones that we can use to tune all the shading. So you can see here it's pretty much everything is black and white with just a bit of probably coloration there. And let's go and build a prop. We exported that camera thing. One thing that we need to do, again, if we go and try and build it, it will, let's say res info. That should fail because the scale is off. Yep, that's correct. So it doesn't know the scale. But as I said, now we have this useful scripts that can do the calculation for us. It's not there, so let's grab it from here, put it in here. We already have marker size set. Let's let it do the job. There you go. So we got the scale, we got the exposure compensation stuff. Now we can edit our, oops, nope, edit. The size scale is 173,585, and there's a way to modify all that automatically. We'll just do it manually for now. Cameras, we don't want to use these. We exported just those two views. What else? Let's disable all the sharpening, and let's disable this normal map correction thing as well. So that's good. We just leave it like that. Exposure, I set it, I think. Yep, all that's set, so all that is good. What's the res info for that object? Okay, so it says slightly over 2K. It says 3K, but okay, it's basically 2K. So we go on 2K. One thing to keep in mind that by default we would downscale the images. So let's make sure that for this specific one we don't do any downscaling. And now let's go and build it. And we should see it going through one camera, and this is second camera. That's good. Now it's building everything. This is just a lot of post-processing to make sure that everything is dilated and so on. Okay, it took 20 seconds. We got all our textures, intermediate textures over here with proper now exposure. That was automatically calculated. Our normal maps, our high poly normal map, and as you can see here, it would have some detail extra, but because we're trying to build just a 2D material of this, we just ignore all that stuff. But this is also our reflectance map. Again, we can open it in Photoshop. What's the average value? 60, and 60 means, if we open calculator, and now I have two, 60 basically means 60 over 255 to the power of 2.2 is 0.004. That's 4%, so you can multiply it by 100, so 4%. So this is our pretty much classical dielectric with 4% reflectance on that, so that is good. Now let's go ahead and open it in Blender and do the calibration of the shader in there. So preview model, so it's done that, click play. Again, here by default in future version they're still iterating on what the default should be there. Here it's a bit tuned for more artistic kind of color graded look. Anyway, let's go ahead and disable all that stuff in Eevee. Make sure that that the filter size is similar to what the camera has. Let's knock off all the grading parameters and tone mapping curves and stuff like that, so remove everything. Let's copy this one light and disable all those other ones, disable all these cubes and so on. So that's our, remove this off screen so it doesn't throw us off. Make sure material is visible, hide that. Okay, so that's good. Now let's open our reference images. Open, go back, reference, and first let's make sure that the light direction is somewhat similar to what we have. So specular small one, make sure that it's view as render. As I said, here it doesn't do much because everything is like all, but once we start playing with exposure we need to set that one. So that's our specular. Now we have our guy over here. Let's make sure it's oriented somewhat similar. Also load the diffuse version. It's the same stuff. That's diffuse. Knock this back. So that's about similar, the same. Is it the same? No. Or is it on the other side? Should it be like this? Yeah, I think so. Yep. That's it's approximately, again, I'm eyeballing it here, but there is a way to export everything as is. So obviously right now from the diffuse image is pretty hard to tell what the light direction is. So on this using specular one it's probably a bit easier. So let's go to spec. Let's not forget to kill all the ambient stuff here. Go back to material. So it should be around 0.3, but let's set roughness, at least it should be around 1, probably something like that, and light direction should be, let's see, I'm looking at this component over here, at this element or whatever it is in this thing, just trying to make sure that if there were shadows where they would be, something like that. Again, the intensity, it's better to tune it based on the diffuse because it's less view dependent. So we just switch to diffuse and we can clearly see that the light source here is a bit too dark. It's 3 fine. Again, the easiest thing to do is probably bring them in Photoshop, and with curves you can do stuff like this and make sure that they disappear in the same way. It's maybe a little bit brighter, so it's 3, I don't know, 2.9 maybe. Is that better? Yeah, probably something like that. And they would clip, so that looks pretty accurate. Again, we can do sort of the average around 61. So I'd say it's close enough. So now we know that our diffuse was calibrated based on markers, and here we just adjusted the light intensity to match the actual exposure, because this reference image, we know that it's not exposure corrected. We don't know how far off it is, so that's why we use diffuse and adjusted light intensity, just to make sure that everything is on the same scale there. And that's our reference image. So now let's finally adjust the reflectance for the specular to make sure that it's in the same range there. So that seems pretty close to me, more or less. There is obviously, if we move light around or the camera around, the intensity would change a little bit, so it can probably would create, as I said, this is kind of eyeballing, but I just know that for Blender, for this specific one, this should be around like 30% or so, and specular roughness is a little bit over, and so on. About 1.1, 1.2 overshooting. Exposure, gamma could be left at 1, and basically that's it. So if we can see, we compare overall look and the character of the specular, that's accurate. Again, we didn't, all the changes that we've done, they don't affect the diffuse so much. To make sure that nothing changed, let's quickly again switch back to diffuse here. Okay, it's still good. Now finally let's put everything together. Let's go to our comp. There you go. We can see our render on the left, our reference on the right. That's using Eevee render. Again, assuming that Blender is calibrated, and the same between Eevee and Cycles, that is the case here. We're in Material Preview. I can go to Render and switch to Cycles, set it to GPU, and we see, like, you know, in Eevee, this is Eevee, this is rendered Cycles, so we get the same results. And now we can go and start adjusting exposure, and we see that both images react in the same way. We can play with gamma and see that everything reacts similarly, and also keep in mind that the render on the left doesn't have any subsurface or anything like that applied to it, so it's basically just that. And then in modern games or anywhere else, you can always, but you would always do some tone mapping and film it curves and stuff like that. So here we go from standard to filmic that makes image a bit desaturated and having less contrast, and that's what all those other looks are for, where you can start to basically apply different sorts of S-curves to them, adjust exposure, like very high contrast, play a bit with exposure. And usually if your render is bad or materials are not set up well, once you start messing with all this color grading stuff that emphasizes or cranks up all the imperfections and differences, usually that's when any manual kind of thing would break there. And here we make sure that it's all pretty much there, and we can look also at just the diffuse component or just the specular component. Same stuff there on the image. Again, it could be a bit view dependent there, and this is where you can crank up the colors and start seeing all that color variations there. But basically, yeah, at this point we got our prop in, and the every other one, it's pretty much should be the same parameters. The main one that I would point out in this specific setup is this reflectance, what's in textures, to make it look consistent across all other different scans and renders, specifically in Blender. And this specific shader should be 0.33, give or take a little bit, and overshoot roughness a little bit, and maybe if it doesn't fit into single lobe, modify the gamma a little bit on that reflectance texture. I would say that's pretty much it at this point. When we do go and generate final deployed textures, some of this stuff gets combined, like for instance reflectance gets combined with the color, and roughness gets adjusted a little bit for metallic and more shiny things. But once you take those textures, bring them into any other render, pretty much the set of steps is very similar to what I have shown here. And at that point, depending on what your actual textures are in your engine on render, you can decide whether to pre-process these textures or just leave them as is and play with sliders in your shaders. At that point, it's really up to you. So if there are any questions, you can always email me or leave comments, and I'll try to answer them. That's it. Thank you.